Hey guys, tonight we're going on a rather unusual adventure, one that most travel brochures tend to, shall we say, omit. Forget the sun-drenched beaches and bustling cityscapes. We're strapping on our metaphorical mucklucks and venturing deep into the frigid, hushed world of 19th century Arctic explorers. We're not talking about the heroic flags-planted, glory-seeking moments, but the quiet, often mundane, domestic ballet of survival. You probably won't survive this, not in the literal sense of facing frostbite and scurvy, but perhaps your preconceived notions of Arctic exploration might just melt away like an ice floe in July. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see how far our little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not waking to the gentle chirping of birds or the soft glow of a sunrise filtering through your bedroom window. Oh no. You're nestled, or perhaps more accurately, entombed within the thick, canvas-lined confines of your bunk aboard a wooden vessel, creaking and groaning like an ancient beast. Trapped in an icy embrace, the air, even within the supposed warmth of the ship, is a frigid kiss against your exposed nose. Your breath, a delicate fog, dances above you, a miniature cloud system forming and dissipating with each exhale. You can hear the distant, almost muffled thud of footsteps on the deck above, a rhythmic, muffled sound that signals the start of another day in this frozen, unyielding world. It's a sound that simultaneously reassures you of life and reminds you of the crushing isolation that stretches for hundreds, if not thousands, of miles in every direction. Your first instinct, and it's a powerful one, is to burrow deeper. The layers of wool blankets, probably smelling faintly of dampness and the unwashed human, are your only true defense against the relentless cold. The desire to simply cease to exist for another hour, to postpone the inevitable confrontation with the day, is almost overwhelming. But duty calls, or more accurately, the internal biological clock, coupled with the subtle stirrings of your bunkmates, pulls you reluctantly from the embrace of sleep. There's no snooze button here, no digital alarm clock, only the growing chill that begins to seep into your bones, even through the thickest of coverings. As you reluctantly uncurl, a shiver, deep and bone-jarring, racks your frame. The transition from the relative warmth of your cocoon to the raw, biting air of the cabin is always a shock. You swing your legs over the edge of the bunk, your bare feet meeting the rough wooden floorboards, which feel like blocks of ice against your skin. You quickly reach for your thickest wool socks, perhaps even a second pair, tugging them on with clumsy fingers that are already stiff with cold. This is no place for leisurely stretching or a thoughtful meditation session. Every movement is deliberate, a calculated effort to conserve precious warmth. The routine begins with the donning of the first few layers, a ritual performed often in the dim light of a flickering oil lamp or the faint glow of dawn that barely penetrates the thick porthole glass. You pull on your heavy flannel shirt, the fabric coarse but comforting against your skin, followed by a thick wool sweater. You might even find a pair of long johns, a truly revolutionary garment for the 19th century, though perhaps not as universally adored as some of us might imagine. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of thermal underwear was a purely practical decision or a subtle nod to emerging Victorian sensibilities about modesty, even in the wilds. You can almost hear the sighs of relief from the explorers, Finally, a way to be warm and appear somewhat dignified while shivering uncontrollably. Then comes the trousers, likely thick wool, and perhaps another pair over them, because, well, it's the Arctic. And if you think your morning scramble for clean clothes is bad, imagine having a limited supply for months, if not years, on end, with no laundry facilities beyond melting snow and rubbing clothes with hard soap. Let's just say personal aroma. It was probably not a top priority on the expedition's manifest. This practical approach to hygiene sometimes led to some rather quirky innovations, like the widespread belief that soaking clothes in dilute vinegar could freshen them. A tidbit that I personally find both amusing and slightly unsettling. Once adequately bundled, you make your way to the small, shared wash basin, often a bucket of melted snow or ice chipped away from the ship's store. The water is predictably, painfully cold. You splash a meager amount on your face, the shock helping to fully awaken you, even as it stings. Shaving, for those who bother, is a hasty, often perilous affair with a cold blade and numb fingers, probably leading to more nicks than a novice barber. A quick wipe with a rough cloth, and you're as fresh as you're going to get. No fancy toners or moisturizers here, just the raw, bracing reality of the North. As you prepare, the smells of the ship begin to mingle and emerge. The faint, metallic temps of the cold, the underlying scent of stale wood and canvas, and then the most anticipated aroma, the robust, earthy smell of coffee brewing in the galley. This is a mainstream historical fact. Coffee and tea were vital morale boosters on these expeditions, providing not just warmth but a psychological anchor, a familiar ritual in an utterly alien environment. The sound of the coffee pot bubbling, a welcome counterpoint to the creaking ice, is a small domestic symphony promising a brief respite from the gnawing cold. You might even catch a whiff of burning whale oil from the lamps, a scent that, while practical for illumination, probably wasn't winning any awards for best cabin fragrance. Ah, the subtle notes of charred blubber, truly invigorating. You might quip to yourself, stifling a yawn that threatens to freeze on your face. The communal nature of these awakening rituals is striking. There's no private space, no quiet contemplation. You are constantly aware of your shipmates, their rustlings, their coughs, their murmured greetings. It's a collective awakening, a shared acceptance of the day's harsh realities. You move with a practiced efficiency born of necessity, your body already accustomed to the dance, required to navigate the cramped quarters without bumping into others or knocking over precious supplies. The cold, in a strange way, becomes a unifying force, a shared adversary that binds you together. You are all in this frigid crucible, facing the same challenges, dreaming of the same warmth, and longing for the same familiar comforts of home. The aroma of coffee, rich and inviting, pulls you like a magnetic force from the chill of your bunk through the narrow, frost-kissed passageways of the ship. You emerge into the main mess, a space that, while cramped, serves as the expedition's heart. It's a low-ceilinged cavern of flickering lamplight and a haze of breath. The air thick with the combined sense of simmering coffee, damp wool, and something vaguely meaty. Every available surface seems to be covered in condensation, lending a perpetually dewy sheen to the wooden tables and benches. The only thing colder than outside, it seems, is the inside of your boots. You shuffle towards the shared table, your heavy boots thudding softly on the planked floor, joining the growing chorus of muffled movements and low murmurs. Here, in this small, enclosed world, breakfast isn't just a meal. It's a communion, a daily ritual that stitches together the frayed edges of isolation and monotony. You slide onto a bench, careful not to jostle the man next to you too much. Personal space is a luxury you abandon somewhere south of the Arctic Circle. The warmth emanating from the small iron stove in the corner is a cruel tease. It makes your face flush while your back remains stubbornly chilled. Someone coughs, a deep, resonant sound that echoes in the confined space, reminding you of the pervasive dampness and the constant threat of a chest cold that can quickly escalate into something far more serious. The cook, a perpetually stoic figure, often caked in flour and smelling faintly of grease and desperation, presides over a steaming pot of coffee. This potent brew, thick and black, is distributed generously, often without the niceties of milk or sugar. You cup the tin mug in your gloved hands, feeling the heat seep into your chilled fingers. A small but significant comfort. It's a mainstream, historical fact that coffee and tea were consumed in vast quantities on these expeditions, not just for the caffeine jolt, but for the sheer psychological comfort of a hot beverage in a world defined by ice. It was a taste of civilization, a liquid hug from home, even if that home was thousands of miles away and infinitely warmer. You might even find yourself comparing it to your favorite fancy latte back home, a thought that's so absurd in this context it almost makes you snort into your mug. Then comes the food. The centerpiece of nearly every Arctic explorer's diet was pemmican, a fascinating, albeit unappetizing, concoction. Imagine lean, dried meat, pounded into a powder, mixed with melted fat, and occasionally dried berries. This dense, brick-like substance was a caloric powerhouse, packed with energy to fuel arduous treks. It tasted, well, it tasted like survival. You'd break off a chunk, tough as shoe leather, before you attempted to gnaw it, and chew, and chew, and chew. It was the original energy bar, only significantly less palatable and far more likely to get stuck in your molars. Sometimes, you'd soak a piece in boiling water to soften it into a sort of meaty gruel, which was marginally easier on the jaw, but perhaps even less appealing to the eye. Accompanying the pemmican would be hardtack or ship's biscuit. These were essentially flour and water, baked until rock hard to prevent spoilage. You could literally break a tooth on them if you weren't careful. The common practice was to dunk them in your coffee or tea, allowing them to soften into a starchy, slightly flavored paste. It was a testament to human resilience, or perhaps just sheer hunger, that anyone willingly consumed these culinary challenges. A cracker so sturdy it could probably stop a musket ball. You might joke, trying to lighten the perpetual gloom, though the joke mostly lands with a soft thud, like the hardtack itself on the table. Breakfast was a noisy affair, not with boisterous conversation, but with the sounds of sustained chewing, slurping of coffee, and the occasional clink of a tin plate against wood. Talk was usually practical, the weather conditions, the day's tasks, the state of the ice. There was a sense of quiet determination, a shared understanding that this was simply what had to be done to face another day in the unforgiving wilderness. The social dynamic was subtle. You'd notice who was looking a bit gaunt, who had a cough that sounded worse than yesterday's, whose spirits seemed particularly low. These observations were unspoken, but they formed the bedrock of the cruise. Unspoken camaraderie. Everyone was in this together, and a shared meal, no matter how humble, reinforced that bond. On rare, glorious occasions, there might be a small treat, perhaps a jar of preserved fruit, or a bit of condensed milk for the coffee. These were moments of pure, unadulterated luxury, savored slowly, each spoonful a fleeting connection to a world of abundance. Such treats, however, were carefully rationed, parceled out with the solemnity of a religious rite. The contrast between these occasional indulgences and the daily grind of pemmican and hardtack only served to highlight the stark realities of their existence. It was like getting a single, perfectly ripe berry after months of only eating dried twigs, truly an experience for the ages. Cleaning up was another minor ordeal. Water was precious, obtained by melting ice, a laborious process. Washing dishes often involved scraping them clean with knives or bits of cloth, followed by a quick rinse in a bucket of cold water, if you were lucky. The idea of sparkling clean plates was a distant memory, left behind with fresh vegetables and hot baths. This lack of rigorous hygiene in the mess, combined with the close quarters and limited sanitation, unfortunately contributed to the spread of illness, a constant shadow lurking over every expedition. You'd quickly learn not to be too squeamish, because frankly, squeamishness was a luxury you couldn't afford out here. One particularly quirky tidbit about Arctic diets of the era involves spruce beer. You see, scurvy, that insidious disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was the scourge of these long voyages, while its exact cause wasn't fully understood until much later. Explorers learned that consuming fresh plant matter helped, so they would brew a crude beer from spruce needles, which are surprisingly rich in vitamin C. It wasn't exactly a craft ale, but it was a crucial, albeit bitter, preventative measure against a slow, agonizing death. Imagine having to choke down your daily dose of pine needle juice. It makes your morning green smoothie seem like a gourmet delight, doesn't it? The daily breakfast routine was also a time for a mental calibration. You'd mentally review the plan for the day, whether it was preparing for a sledge journey, making repairs to the ship, or tending to scientific instruments. The very act of preparing and consuming food, no matter how basic, provided a sense of purpose and structure in a world that often felt utterly formless and endless. You'd listen to the chatter, picking up on the moods of the crew. Some days, there would be a palpable sense of fatigue, the voices lower, the movements slower. Other days, a sudden shift in the wind, a promising observation about the ice, or even just the news of a successful hunt might inject a flicker of cautious optimism into the air. And you'd hear a few more jokes, a bit more laughter. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of monotonous diets contributed significantly to the mental health struggles faced by explorers during long Arctic winters. Beyond just the physical effects of nutrient deficiencies, was it just the lack of vitamins? Or was the sheer, relentless boredom of the same bland food day after day enough to drive a man to distraction? It's a compelling question, isn't it? When you're out here, every sensory experience is heightened, and the absence of culinary variety can feel like a profound deprivation. It's not just about sustenance. It's about pleasure, about comfort, about the small joys that sustain the soul. As the last drops of coffee are drained, and the last crumbs of hardtack are scraped from plates, a collective sigh of readiness seems to settle over the mess. The breakfast ritual concludes not with a flourish, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in atmosphere. The clatter subsides, and the men begin to rise, preparing for the tasks that await them in the unrelenting cold outside. You stand up, feeling the warmth of the coffee settle in your stomach, a fleeting comfort against the pervasive chill that awaits you. The day, with all its challenges, has officially begun. You might just survive it, after all. With the last remnants of pemmican scraped from your plate and the final sips of coffee warming your stomach, the true confrontation with the Arctic begins. Stepping away from the shared warmth of the mess, you head back into the slightly colder, often damper, sleeping quarters, where the true daily battle commences. The art of dressing for absolute zero. It's a performance in slow motion, a meticulous layering ritual that transforms you from a somewhat recognizable human being into a walking, talking, incredibly bulky fabric sculpture. If a fashion show were held in the Arctic, the theme would undoubtedly be more is more, with an emphasis on textiles that could probably stop a small caliber bullet. You begin with the layers you've already adopted, your long johns and flannel shirt, but now it's time to truly armor yourself against the elements. The first additional layer is often another thick wool shirt, or perhaps a heavy wool vest. You pull it over your head, feeling the coarse fabric rasp against your skin, occasionally sparking with static electricity in the dry, cold air. It's a minor irritation, of course, but it's just the first in a symphony of discomforts. Each garment is a commitment, a conscious decision to add another barrier between your vulnerable flesh and the relentless, biting cold that lurks just beyond the ship's timbers. Next come the trousers. You might have one pair of heavy wool trousers, or perhaps two, worn one over the other. Then, over those, you'd pull on a pair of duffel trousers, typically made from a thick, felted wool that provided excellent insulation. Imagine trying to put on a pair of pants made from a picnic blanket that's been stiffened by cold. It's a wrestling match. You pull and tug, shimmy and hop, feeling your movements increasingly restricted. Your inner voice might be screaming, "Is this what a sausage feels like in its casing?" Because honestly, you're feeling less like an explorer and more like a carefully packaged deli item. The upper body demands even more attention. Over your shirts and vest, you'd add another layer, perhaps a thick knitted jumper, probably hand-knitted by someone back home with optimistic notions of your comfort. Then comes the main outer jacket, often a heavy, canvas-lined garment, sometimes with a fur collar. These were the workhorses of Arctic outerwear, designed to break the wind and offer a modicum of protection from snow. Some expeditions favored coats lined with animal furs, bear, wolf, or caribou, which offered unparalleled warmth, but were incredibly bulky and could be quite smelly, especially when damp. The fur itself, once beautiful and sleek, often looked rather bedraggled after weeks of frost and exertion. Now for the extremities, the most vulnerable points of attack for Jack Frost. Your head is critical. You'd pull on a thick wool balaclava, perhaps one that covers your entire face except for small eye holes, making you look less like a brave explorer and more like a charming bank robber. Over this, a heavy fur cap, often with ear flaps that could be tied down, completing the transformation into a vaguely menacing, yet undoubtedly warm, creature. The simple act of turning your head becomes a deliberate swivel as the layers of fabric restrict your peripheral vision. You find yourself nodding a lot, partly out of agreement, partly because it's the only way to indicate you've heard someone without dislocating your neck. For your hands, it's a two-part system. First, thin wool gloves to provide a base layer and allow some dexterity for tasks that require fine motor skills, like fiddling with frozen ropes or navigating tricky equipment. Over these, you'd pull on a pair of massive, fur-lined mitts. These were often so large and clumsy that picking up a dropped coin felt like an Olympic feat. You become acutely aware of the constant battle between warmth and utility. Do you sacrifice a bit of warmth for the ability to actually grip something? Or do you accept your fate as a well-insulated, but largely useless, set of human paws? It's a choice you grapple with daily. And then, the feet. All the feet. Your wool socks, already thick from your initial awakening, are just the beginning. You'd pull on one, maybe two, more pairs of thick wool socks, often handmade and bristling, with individual strands of yarn. These were crucial. A mainstream historical fact is that explorers quickly learned the critical importance of keeping feet dry and warm. Frostbite on the extremities was a constant, debilitating threat, often leading to amputation. Over these layers of wool, you'd dan your mucklocks or sealskin boots. Traditional indigenous footwear adopted by many explorers due to their superior insulation and lightweight flexibility, compared to heavy leather boots that often froze solid. Putting on frozen boots is a special kind of hell. They're stiff, unyielding, and fight you every step of the way, clinging to your feet like stubborn, icy vices. You push, you pull, you curse under your breath, convinced that some malevolent Arctic spirit is conspiring to keep you barefoot in the snow. The entire process of dressing could take a solid 15 to 20 minutes, a slow, deliberate ritual. In the dim, cold light, every movement was a struggle against the bulk and stiffness of the clothes. You'd waddle rather than walk, your arms held slightly out from your body by the sheer volume of fabric. The sound of rustling wool and canvas would accompany your every step, a constant reminder of the physical burden you carried. And if you needed to do anything involving bending, like tying a bootlace or picking something up from the floor, it became a comical contortion act. Forget about touching your toes. You'd be lucky to touch your knees. Maintaining these crucial layers was another daily battle. Wool, while warm, absorbs moisture, and once damp, it loses much of its insulating properties. Drying clothes in the Arctic was a monumental challenge. Sometimes, you'd hang damp socks and gloves near the stove, hoping they'd dry overnight. But more often than not, you'd wake to find them still stiff and cold, or even frozen solid. Imagine pulling on a pair of frozen socks. It's a rude awakening that makes a cold shower feel like a spa treatment. This constant dampness and inability to fully dry garments led to significant discomfort, skin irritation, and contributed to conditions like trench foot. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the desperate measures taken for warmth and dryness. Some explorers would actually line their boots and gloves with dried grass or sedges. This provided an extra layer of insulation and helped absorb moisture, keeping feet and hands drier than wool alone could manage. It sounds bizarre, like stuffing hay in your shoes, but it was a practical, albeit somewhat scratchy, solution borrowed from indigenous knowledge. Historians still argue whether the slow adoption of indigenous clothing technology, like fully integrated fursuits or specific types of footwear, by early European explorers prolonged the suffering and increased the casualty rates on many expeditions. Was it pride, ignorance, or simply logistical difficulties that prevented them from fully embracing what local populations had perfected over centuries? It's a compelling debate, considering the brutal toll the Arctic took beyond the physical discomfort. There was the psychological aspect of being constantly bundled, restricted, and often itchy. The feeling of being perpetually encased in layers could be suffocating, especially for men accustomed to more freedom of movement. It contributed to the feeling of being cut off from the world, of being a prisoner of your own protective shell. Yet, you also knew that these layers were your lifeline, the only thing standing between you and the swift, brutal embrace of the hypothermia. So, you endured the bulk, the stiffness, the occasional itch, knowing that every stitch, every fiber was working tirelessly to keep you alive. As you finally emerge from the dressing ritual, fully encased in your Arctic armor, you look around. At your fellow explorers, they too have transformed, becoming bulky, almost shapeless figures, moving with a ponderous gait. Individual personalities seem to fade beneath the layers of wool and fur, replaced by a collective determination. You might catch someone struggling with a stiff boot, or adjusting a balaclava that refuses to sit right, and offer a sympathetic grunt of understanding. The shared experience of this daily wardrobe woe fosters a silent camaraderie, a mutual acknowledgement of the absurd and challenging reality you all face. You are dressed, prepared, and ready for whatever the frozen world throws at you. Even if you feel like a particularly well-insulated, but incredibly clumsy, marshmallow. Fully armored against the external chill, you stand ready, a bulky, mobile fortress of wool and canvas. But often, the day's journey isn't outward across the blinding expanse of snow and ice. It's inward, deeper into the ship or hut, where the real endurance test of domesticity begins. The biting wind howling outside, the endless creaking and groaning of the ice-bound vessel, or the sheer featureless monotony of the white landscape beyond the porthole frequently dictate that your primary domain will be the cramped, perpetually shadowed confines of your temporary home. This is where cabin fever, that subtle, insidious malaise, truly sets in, and where the most creative, sometimes desperate, forms of comfort and pastime emerge. You retreat from the narrow passageways, perhaps back to the main common area, or a slightly larger space designated for recreation and work. The air here, though warmer than the outside, is heavy with the scent of stale air, lamp oil, unwashed bodies, and the lingering aroma of breakfast. Frost blooms in delicate, fern-like patterns on the inside of the bulkheads, a beautiful, yet chilling, reminder of the external world's constant pressure. Every surface seems to have a thin, clammy film of condensation. It's a space designed for utility, not for leisure, yet it must serve for both. For months on end, your personal domain is likely a small bunk, perhaps a narrow shelf above it, and a tiny, communal locker. Privacy is a word that loses all meaning out here. You are always aware of your shipmates, their snores at night, their nervous coughs during the day, the incessant shuffle of their boots, the low hum of their conversations. Every sound, every movement becomes amplified in the claustrophobic environment. It's like living in a very loud, very cold shoebox with a dozen or so very large, very opinionated hamsters. You learn to filter, to create mental barriers, to find quiet moments in the midst of constant proximity. The day stretches before you, an expanse of enforced idleness, broken by bursts of intense, shared labor. The sun, when it appears at all, traces a low, fleeting arc across the horizon, casting long, pale shadows that offer little in the way of warmth or cheer. During the long Arctic night, which can last for weeks or even months, the only illumination comes from precious oil lamps or candles, casting a flickering, melancholic glow that dances with the shadows, playing tricks on the eyes and the mind. It's a constant reminder that the world outside is dark, immense, and indifferent. To combat the creeping monotony and the psychological toll of such confinement, explorers developed a remarkable array of domestic routines and pastimes. Reading was paramount. The ship's library, often meager but intensely valued, contained everything from scientific texts and navigational guides to novels, poetry, and religious texts. A mainstream historical fact is that on many expeditions, the reading of books or salvaged newspapers aloud became a communal evening ritual, drawing men together and transporting them, if only for an hour, from their icy prison. Imagine listening to a thrilling adventure story while your feet are numb with cold and the ship groans around you. It's immersive entertainment on a whole new level. Some expeditions even created their own ship's newspapers, handwritten. Broadsheets filled with jokes, observations, and gossip. A truly quirky tidbit that showcased their desperate need for connection and shared humor. Writing was another crucial outlet. Journals, diaries, and letters home, even if they wouldn't be sent for months or even years, became a lifeline. They were a space for personal reflection, a way to process the vastness of the experience, to chronicle the mundane alongside the miraculous. You'd carefully dip your pen into ink, watching it flow onto the page, recording the day's temperature, the thickness of the ice, a fleeting thought about home, or a quiet lament for a lost friend. This act of documenting, of imposing order on the chaos, was a quiet rebellion against the disorienting reality of the Arctic. Historians still argue whether the extensive journaling prevalent among 19th century explorers was primarily a scientific endeavor, a tool for future historians, or a crucial form of self-therapy and psychological survival in the face of profound isolation. Was it documentation for posterity, or simply a way to keep from talking to the frost patterns on the wall? Games were vital for entertainment and to stimulate the mind. Cards, chess, dominoes, and checkers were common, often played on improvised boards with pieces carved from wood or bone. The clack of dominoes, the soft rustle of cards, the hushed concentration during a chess match, these sounds brought a semblance of normalcy to the abnormal. Arguments, inevitably, would flare up over a misplayed hand or a contested move, quickly extinguished by the shared understanding that sustained conflict was a luxury no one could afford in such close quarters. You might find yourself intensely focused on a game of solitaire, almost willing the cards to turn in your favor, as if a good hand could somehow influence the frozen world outside. Music was another powerful antidote to the gloom. Many expeditions carried instruments, flutes, accordions, fiddles, even a harmonium. Even if you couldn't play, you'd gather to listen. The melodies weaving through the confined space, conjuring memories of home, of warmth, of dancing and laughter. Singing, often boisterous sea shanties or melancholic ballads, would erupt spontaneously. A collective expression of camaraderie and resilience. It was the original unplugged session, performed for an audience of grizzled, bearded men who probably hadn't seen a fresh vegetable in months. Beyond these organized pastimes, individual hobbies flourished. Some men would occupy themselves with carving intricate figures from wood or bone, creating small, tactile reminders of their humanity. Others might try their hand at drawing or sketching the stark landscapes, the ship or their fellow crew members, capturing fleeting moments of beauty or boredom. Knot tying became a meditative practice, a way to keep hands busy and minds focused. There was a constant need for repairs, mending clothes, patching equipment, sharpening tools, which provided a practical outlet for restless energy and a tangible sense of accomplishment. The monotony also presented an unexpected opportunity for self-improvement and education. Men from different backgrounds would share their knowledge. A sailor might teach navigation to a scientist, who in turn might explain celestial mechanics. Languages were learned, mathematical puzzles tackled, and philosophical debates engaged. in with surprising fervor. It was an impromptu university, albeit one operating in a perpetual state of hypothermia. This intellectual stimulation was crucial for maintaining mental acuity and preventing the mind from succumbing to the oppressive sameness. Despite the close quarters, or perhaps because of them, maintaining social harmony was a delicate dance. Minor irritations could fester, leading to silent resentments or petty squabbles. The established hierarchy of the expedition, from the captain down, played a crucial role in maintaining order and mediating disputes. Yet, there were also moments of profound connection, of shared vulnerability, where men truly saw each other, stripped bare of pretense by the harsh environment. A shared laugh over a bad joke, a quiet moment of commiseration, a helping hand offered without a word. These small acts of kindness were the true comforts of the cabin, the threads that wove the disparate individuals into a cohesive, if occasionally dysfunctional, family. It was a bit like a very long, very cold reality TV show, except without the cameras, the prize money, or the option to simply vote someone off the island. The very lack of external stimulation forced an internal focus, a reliance on ingenuity and resilience to create a semblance of normal domesticity. The cabin, with its constant creaks and groans, its peculiar smells, and its ever-present chill, became more than just shelter. It was a crucible for character, a stage for the quiet dramas of human endurance. It was here, in the long, dark hours, that the true spirit of these expeditions was forged, not on the ice, but within the close, shared confines of their home. You've armored yourself against the cold, navigated the psychological maze of cabin fever, and perhaps even learned to play a surprisingly aggressive game of checkers. But now comes a more intimate, and arguably more challenging, aspect of Arctic domesticity, the elusive quest for cleanliness in a world that actively resists it. Maintaining personal hygiene in the polar regions of the 19th century wasn't just difficult. It was a daily, often comical, sometimes grim, battle against the elements and common sense. Forget your morning hot shower and fluffy towel. Here, a wash is less about feeling fresh and more about preventing actual rot. The fundamental challenge, of course, is water. Every drop of fresh water, essential for drinking, cooking, and crucially, for washing, had to be obtained by melting ice or snow. This was a labor-intensive, fuel-consuming process, meaning water was a precious commodity, rationed with the solemnity usually reserved for gold. You wouldn't waste a single drop on a frivolous full-body soak. The idea of a bath becomes a distant, almost mythical concept, conjuring images of warm, steamy rooms that feel utterly alien to your current reality. Your daily cleansing ritual, if you could call it that, is far more rudimentary. You might approach a communal basin, perhaps a large metal pot filled with melted snow, lukewarm at best, often chilling rapidly as soon as it's exposed to the cabin air. You dip a rough cloth into the frigid water, wringing it out quickly before applying it to your face, neck, and hands. The shock of the cold water is bracing, certainly effective at waking you up, but it leaves your skin feeling taut and dry, not refreshed. It's less a wash, more a quick wipe down, akin to preparing for a very casual, very cold public appearance. You become intimately familiar with the concept of the Arctic sponge bath, a quick dab and dash that prioritizes critical areas over comprehensive coverage. Imagine trying to get ready for a formal dinner party with nothing but a half-melted ice cube and a handkerchief. That's roughly the level of sophistication we're talking about here. Shaving, for those still committed to the practice, was a perilous undertaking, with numb fingers, a cold blade, and water that probably resembled a slushy. Nicks and cuts were common. Many men simply let their beards grow, embracing the natural insulation and the undeniable wisdom of foregoing unnecessary skin exposure to the biting air. Hair washing was an even rarer event. Your hair, caked with grime and probably stiff with salt, would become a rather impressive, unkempt nest. Brushing it would be a losing battle, often resulting in more breakage than detangling. The occasional brave soul might attempt a quick rinse with melted snow, but the sheer effort of drying it in the cold, damp air often outweighed the fleeting sensation of cleanliness. Dental hygiene was similarly rudimentary. A simple toothbrush, if one was even available, with a bit of tooth powder, might be used periodically. But regular, thorough brushing was often neglected, leading to its own set of problems, from cavities to gum disease. The constant threat of scurvy, as we'll touch on later, also played havoc with oral health, often causing gums to bleed and teeth to loosen. You'd find yourself exploring the interior of your mouth with your tongue, discovering new and unsettling textures. Perhaps the most significant challenge was laundry. Clothes, especially those thick wool layers, quickly became impregnated with sweat, dirt, and the pervasive smell of dampness. Washing them was a Herculean task. Not only did it require precious melted water, but drying them was a nightmare. Clothes hung inside would often freeze solid, or simply remain perpetually damp, leading to an even more potent aroma. A mainstream historical fact is that explorers often resorted to beating their clothes with sticks to dislodge dirt and ice, or airing them out on deck on rare calmer days, hoping the wind would carry away some of the stink. The idea of a washing machine, or even a simple clothesline in the sun, would have seemed like a miraculous invention from a distant utopian future. You'd likely develop a discerning nose for various grades of not quite clean, a skill honed by months of practical or factory experience. This constant state of being less than fresh had its physical tolls. Skin chafing was common, exacerbated by rough, damp clothing and the constant friction of movement within bulky layers. Minor cuts and scrapes could easily become infected in an environment where cleanliness was compromised and medical supplies limited. Lice and fleas, unfortunately, were an ever-present, if rarely spoken of, reality. Imagine trying to delouse yourself in a small, shared bunk, with only a comb and the dim light of an oil lamp. It adds a whole new dimension to bedtime routine. A quirky tidbit that highlights the lengths they'd go to, and perhaps the prevailing beliefs of the time. Some explorers believed that dry bathing with a rough brush or cloth was a sufficient substitute for water. The idea was to stimulate the skin and remove surface dirt without the inconvenience of precious water. It was a kind of proto-exfoliation, just without any of the delightful scents or soft lotions you'd essentially be scrubbing yourself with. A stiff brush, likely leaving your skin red and raw, but at least, theoretically, cleaner. The psychological impact of this enforced uncleanliness was also significant. There's a certain dignity, a sense of self-respect that comes with being clean. To be constantly grimy, with unwashed hair and body odor that lingered despite your best efforts, chipped away at morale. It was a subtle, insidious erosion of the comforts and norms of civilization. You'd become accustomed to the collective aroma of the crew, a unique blend of wool, sweat, lamp oil, and something vaguely metallic. It was a scent that, upon your eventual return to civilization, would undoubtedly trigger vivid, and perhaps unwanted, memories. Historians still argue whether the psychological burden of poor hygiene and perpetual discomfort played a more significant role in the overall mental decline and low morale observed on some long Arctic expeditions, compared to the more overt dangers of cold and starvation. Was the constant itching, the omnipresent smell, the loss of personal dignity, a hidden factor in the onset of depression or irritability among the crew? It's a complex question, difficult to quantify, but certainly worth considering when you imagine living in such conditions. Despite all these challenges, life went on. The human capacity for adaptation is truly remarkable. You learned to ignore the subtle itch, to tolerate the collective aroma, to accept that true cleanliness was a luxury reserved for another life. The priorities shifted. Warmth, sustenance, and survival eclipsed all else. So you'd perform your minimalist ablutions, pull on your stiff, slightly damp clothes, and step out into the day. Perhaps smelling a little less than fresh, but undeniably prepared for the next challenge that icebound world had to offer. Having navigated the rather unsavory waters of Arctic hygiene, you might find yourself feeling less than sparkling, but certainly ready for the next challenge. And that challenge, surprisingly, often lay not in battling the ice, but in the quiet, profound struggle against the gnawing emptiness of endless white and the crushing weight of isolation. This is where the magic of the written word truly shines, becoming not just a pastime, but a vital lifeline, a mental escape that transports your mind far beyond the freezing confines of the present moment. Picture this: you're huddled in your bunk, or perhaps crammed onto a bench in the dimly lit mess. The only sounds, the creak of the ship and the distant howl of the wind. Your fingers, still stiff from the cold, carefully turn the page of a worn, perhaps dog-eared book. This book, whatever its subject, is more than just paper and ink. It's a portal. It's your ticket to bustling London streets, to sun-drenched Mediterranean shores, to the whispered intimacies of a drawing room drama. You can almost feel the warmth, smell the flowers, hear the distant rumble of carriages, all conjured by the power of words, even as your breath plumes in the frigid air of the cabin. Books aboard these expeditions were treasures, often carried with as much care as scientific instruments. The ship's library, though small, was a microcosm of 19th century intellect and entertainment. You'd find volumes of natural history, meticulously detailing the flora and fauna of distant lands, or perhaps a weighty tome on navigation and astronomy, practical guides for your very real predicament. But just as crucial were the works of pure imagination, novels by Charles Dickens or Sir Walter Scott, collections of poetry, tales of daring adventure. A mainstream historical fact is that literacy was highly valued among the crews, and reading, both solitary and communal, was considered a critical activity for maintaining morale and mental acuity during the long, dark Arctic winters. It wasn't uncommon for an officer to read aloud from a novel each evening, transforming the mess deck into a temporary theater, a shared journey into another world that momentarily dissolved the boundaries of their icy prison. You might be reading a thrilling tale of a gentleman explorer traversing the Amazon, battling exotic beasts and navigating lush jungles. The irony is probably not lost on you. Here you are, an actual explorer, not battling piranhas, but struggling to keep your ink from freezing, your adventure being one of cold, monotony, and the quiet heroism of not losing your mind. It's like watching a cooking show when you've only got hardtack for dinner. both inspiring and slightly torturous. Beyond the shared experience of story time, your personal reading offered a private sanctuary. You could choose to dive into a scientific treatise, perhaps meticulously studying maps of the celestial sphere or the latest theories on magnetism, furthering your own knowledge and contributing to the expedition's intellectual pursuits. Or you might pick up a volume of poetry, letting the rhythm and imagery wash over you, a soothing balm to the stark realities of your existence. Each page turned was a small victory against the encroaching stillness, a testament to the enduring power of the human mind to seek stimulation and meaning. Then there were the letters. Oh, the letters. These weren't just correspondence. They were fragments of home, tangible connections to the world you had left behind. The arrival of a mail packet, a rare and momentous event, would send a ripple of excitement through the ship. You'd tear open the envelope with trembling fingers, hoping for news of family, of friends, of the mundane yet infinitely precious details of everyday life. A letter from your mother, describing the spring flowers blooming in the garden, or an update from a friend about local politics, would feel like a blast of warm air from another dimension. Writing letters, too, was a ritual of profound importance. You'd find a quiet corner, perhaps perched awkwardly on a sea chest, and carefully begin to pen your thoughts. What do you tell them? Do you describe the biting cold, the endless darkness, the gnawing hunger, the constant ache in your joints? Or do you paint a rosier picture, emphasizing the discoveries, the camaraderie, the breathtaking beauty of the aurora borealis? You choose your words carefully, knowing that these sentences, once they finally reach their destination months or even years later, will be pored over, cherished, and perhaps cause worry. This act of writing is a therapeutic exercise, a way to process the vastness of your experience, to impose some order on the chaos, to maintain a connection to your past self. A quirky tidbit about the preservation of these precious literary lifelines. On some expeditions, books, and particularly letters, were carefully bundled and wrapped in oilcloth or even placed in sealed tins to protect them from the pervasive dampness that threatened to turn paper into pulp. The effort they went to protect a few pages of text speaks volumes about their psychological value. Imagine someone today meticulously wrapping their Kindle in 5 layers of plastic every night. The stakes were just a little higher for these guys. The contrast between the adventure novels you might read and the reality of your own expedition was often stark. You'd read about heroes overcoming incredible odds with dramatic flair, while your own heroism might consist of simply enduring another day of wet socks and repetitive meals. Yet these fictional tales also served as a kind of mirror, reflecting the grand narratives of human endeavor and reminding you that your own struggle, however mundane it felt at times, was part of a larger, epic human story. Historians still argue whether the carefully curated narratives presented in explorers' published journals, often ghostwritten or heavily edited upon their return, truly reflected the raw, unvarnished reality recorded in their private diaries. Were these literary endeavors genuine accounts, or were they crafted to appeal to a public hungry for heroism, perhaps downplaying the widespread suffering and domestic squalor? It's a fascinating debate, highlighting the very human desire to shape one's own story, even when facing the starkest truths. The explorers knew their words might be their legacy, so perhaps a bit of literary polish was inevitable in the long, dark, silent hours, when the wind howled like a banshee outside and the ice groaned against the ship's hull. It was the rustle of a page, the whisper of a familiar poem, or the comforting scrawl of a loved one's handwriting that truly sustained you. These were not just pastimes, they were acts of survival. They kept your mind agile, your spirit hopeful, and your connection to the broader human experience unbroken. So, you would read, and write, and dream, allowing the words to build a bridge, however fragile, between your desolate present and the vibrant, bustling world that awaited your return. You fed your mind with tales of distant lands and warmed your heart with letters from home, finding solace in the abstract world of words. But as the day progresses and the Arctic air continues to relentlessly drain your warmth, another, more primal need asserts itself. The need to feed your body. And when it comes to culinary creativity in the 19th century Arctic, you're not talking about Michelin stars. You're talking about making something palatable out of very little. Defying the brutal environment with warmth and ingenuity, often. In the smoky, cramped confines of the galley, step into the galley, and you're stepping into a different kind of sanctuary. A place where the pervasive cold is momentarily held at bay by the heat of a simple iron stove. The air is thick with the aroma of boiling fat, simmering meat, and something vaguely metallic. It's a scent that permeates your clothes, your hair, your very pores, becoming the indelible perfume of expedition life. The cook, often a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow and an intimate understanding of the limited provisions, reigns supreme here. His domain is small, cluttered with sacks of flour, barrels of salted meat, and stacks of tins, each one a precious repository of calories. His job isn't just to prepare food, it's to sustain hope. The ingredients at his disposal are, to put it mildly, monotonous. Think salted beef, salted pork, dried vegetables, often compressed into hard, unappetizing blocks, flour, hardtack, and of course, that ubiquitous, calorie-dense wonder, pemmican. Fresh produce is a distant memory, a tantalizing whisper from another life. Fuel for the stove, coal, wood, or even whale blubber, is rigorously rationed, meaning cooking is often a slow, deliberate affair, designed to maximize every precious BTU. You wouldn't just throw something on the hob, you'd coax it, cajole it, and make sure every bit of heat was utilized to its fullest. The undisputed king of Arctic cuisine is the stew, or, as it was often generically known, hoosh. Imagine this, a large pot bubbling over the stove, filled with chunks of salted meat, perhaps some reconstituted dried vegetables, and thickened with flour. It's a dish designed for maximum caloric output and minimum fuss. You'd ladle it into your tin plate, the steam rising invitingly in the cold air, temporarily warming your face. The taste, well, it was salty, meaty, and endlessly repetitive, but it was also hot, substantial, and utterly essential for survival. It was the original one-pot meal, if that pot was perpetually filled with varying shades of brown, a mainstream. Historical fact is that this kind of calorically dense, protein and fat-rich diet was paramount for explorers to endure the extreme cold and physical exertion. Even if the nutritional balance was often woefully inadequate, the cook's ingenuity really came into play in trying to break the monotony. Sometimes he might incorporate a precious handful of dried herbs or a pinch of pepper, turning a bland stew into something vaguely more palatable. You might even find yourself savoring a dish that, in any other context, you wouldn't even consider, simply because it offered a fleeting departure from the familiar. It's like being forced to eat the same brand of bland crackers for months, and then someone hands you a cracker with a slightly different flavor. Suddenly, it's gourmet dining. Beyond the daily hoosh, other modest culinary achievements were sometimes attempted. On rare occasions, If flour was plentiful and the cook was feeling ambitious, he might attempt to bake some fresh bread or biscuits. The smell of freshly baked anything in the Arctic was pure heaven, a scent that cut through the prevailing dampness and the underlying odors of the ship like a beacon. These were dense, heavy creations, far from the airy loaves of home. But they offered a comforting texture and a welcome change from hardtack. The warmth of a freshly baked biscuit in your hands, the taste of real bread after months of ships. Biscuit, it was a moment of profound, almost emotional satisfaction. A particularly quirky tidbit regarding Arctic cooking was the use of rendered animal fat as a spread or condiment. While pemmican incorporated fat, explorers often melted down seal blubber or other animal fats, sometimes even polar bear fat, and used it to enrich their meals or spread on hardtack. It provided crucial calories and a sense of richness, though the flavor could be distinctive. Imagine spreading a slightly fishy, savory butter on your cracker. It was certainly a departure from jam, but absolutely essential for survival. This was a culinary innovation born purely out of necessity, a testament to the fact that when you're truly hungry, your palate becomes remarkably unpicky. When hunting was successful, a truly momentous event occurred. Fresh meat, seal, polar bear, caribou, or fish, if they were lucky enough to catch any, provided an incredible boost to morale and, more importantly, to health. The taste of fresh meat, grilled over the stove or simmered into a rich broth, was a revelation after months of salted provisions. It was a sensory explosion, a reminder of the vibrant, living world that existed beyond their immediate struggle. These moments were celebrated, the fresh kill divided with a solemn reverence, knowing that such a feast was a fleeting luxury. This was also a critical, albeit often poorly understood, element in fighting scurvy, as fresh meat, especially organ meat, contained some vitamin C. Historians still argue whether the persistent adherence to traditional European cooking methods and dietary preferences, despite the availability of indigenous knowledge about preserving and preparing local Arctic foods, hindered the overall health and adaptability of many expeditions. Was it pride, a lack of communication, or a genuine disbelief in the effectiveness of native ways that prevented a fuller adoption of local culinary wisdom, potentially leading to more cases of scurvy and malnutrition? It's a debate that highlights the complex interplay of culture, science, and survival in the unforgiving polar environment. You can almost hear the grumpy cook saying, "What do they know about a proper roast?" Beyond the basic sustenance, the mealtimes in the galley, especially supper, became central to the expedition's domestic life. It was a time for camaraderie, for sharing stories, often exaggerated ones, just to keep spirits up, for planning the next day's work, or simply for sitting in companionable silence, soaking in the fleeting warmth and the shared understanding of their predicament. The rhythmic clatter of spoons against tin plates, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, these sounds formed the backdrop to their daily existence, a comforting symphony of survival. So while you might not have found gourmet in the Arctic, you certainly found resilience and resourcefulness on a plate. Each meal, from the simplest hush to the rare, fresh catch, was a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to find comfort even in the most challenging of circumstances. As you push away your plate, the last vestiges of warmth fading from the tin, you feel a renewed sense of strength, ready to face the long Arctic night, sustained by the surprisingly palatable, if repetitive, dishes forged in the heart of your icy home. Having satisfied the primal urge for sustenance, feeling a flicker of renewed strength from that surprisingly palatable hush. Your focus now shifts from the purely physical to the profoundly psychological. Because, in the long, relentless embrace of the Arctic winter, surviving isn't just about food and warmth. It's about holding onto your sanity, keeping the pervasive gloom at bay, and forging bonds with the men around you. This is where leisure and laughter become not just pastimes, but vital, invisible fortifications against the encroaching emptiness. Imagine the mess deck, or the common area after the day's chores are done. Such as they are in perpetual twilight. The air, still heavy with the scent of damp wool and lamp oil, now carries something else. The low hum of anticipation. This is the hour when rigid hierarchy often softens, when officers and crew might mingle over a shared game or a song. It's a time when the human need for connection, for entertainment, for a genuine chuckle overrides the daily grind. These moments were essential, little pockets of warmth and light in the vast, cold darkness, proving that even in the most extreme conditions, you can still find time for a good old-fashioned sing-along or a ridiculously competitive game of cards. Games, of course, were paramount. The clack of dominoes on a rough wooden table, the soft rustle of playing cards, the intense silence punctuated by muttered strategy during a game of chess or checkers. These were the sounds of minds actively engaged, escaping the monotony. You might find yourself locked in a fierce game of whist, betting meager rations of tobacco or sugar, the stakes elevated by the sheer scarcity of anything worth wagering. The intensity was palpable, partly for the game itself, partly for the mental exercise, and partly for the sheer relief of having something, anything, to focus on besides the perpetual cold and the creaking of the ship. A friendly rivalry could brighten days, though a sore loser could just as easily cast a pall over the cabin. It's a delicate balance, much like navigating a particularly icy patch of deck. Then there was the music. Oh, the music. Many expeditions would carry musical instruments, a battered fiddle, a soulful flute, a wheezy concertina, or even a small harmonium. On an evening, someone might pull out an instrument, and hesitant notes would begin to fill the cramped space. Soon, voices would join in, tentatively at first, then with increasing gusto. Sea shanties, mournful ballads of lost love, rousing patriotic songs, or even the latest popular tunes from home, they all found an audience here. A mainstream historical fact is that communal singing was a universal morale booster on these long voyages, fostering a profound sense of camaraderie and allowing men to express emotions that might otherwise remain bottled up. The shared vibrations of voices resonating in the small cabin created a powerful sense of unity. You'd find yourself humming along, perhaps even joining in, your own voice blending with dozens of others, a small chorus against the vast silence. Of the Arctic. Beyond structured entertainment, storytelling was a timeless art form reborn in the polar night. Men would swap exaggerated tales of past adventures, regale each other with humorous anecdotes from home, or even spin spine-tingling ghost stories, the flickering lamp casting eerie shadows that added to the suspense. The familiar cadence of a well-spun yarn, the rising tension, the burst of shared laughter, these were vital acts of connection. You'd learn about your shipmates' lives, their dreams, their fears, in a way that daily duties rarely allowed. This oral tradition was as old as humanity itself, and it thrived in the close confines of the Arctic. A reminder that even without books or instruments, the human voice could weave magic. Some expeditions even dabbled in amateur dramatics. Imagine trying to stage a play in a tiny cabin with limited props and a cast composed entirely of grizzled sailors. It sounds absurd, and it probably was, but the sheer effort, the ridiculous costumes fashioned from blankets and spare canvas, the acting, all contributed to moments of uproarious laughter and unforgettable memories. This quirky tidbit highlights the incredible lengths to which men would go to alleviate boredom and inject some much-needed absurdity into their grim reality. If you thought community theatre was intense, try doing it when half the audience smells of stale pemmican and the stage manager might actually freeze to death. Celebrations were also vital punctuation marks in the monotonous flow of time. Christmas, New Year's Day, birthdays, and even significant expedition milestones like reaching a certain latitude or surviving another month were marked with whatever fanfare could be mustered. Extra rations of sugar or rum, a special if. Still simple meal, a round of toasts, more music, and more stories. These were not just parties. They were reaffirmations of life, defiant gestures against the overwhelming bleakness. They reminded everyone that time was indeed passing, that the outside world still existed, and that they were, despite appearances, still human. Historians still argue whether the presence of robust, organized leisure activities, particularly those involving group participation, significantly reduced the incidence of severe depression and psychological breakdown during long Arctic winters. Was it simply a distraction, or did these shared moments of joy and collective effort genuinely build resilience and social cohesion that prevented mental illness? It's a complex question, difficult to quantify with modern psychological metrics. But the anecdotal evidence from journals certainly suggests that a good laugh or a rousing song was as important as any medical tonic. The beauty of these domestic leisure moments was their simplicity. They didn't require grand gestures or elaborate preparations. They required presence, participation, and a willingness to simply be human together. The clatter of cards, the scratchy notes of a fiddle, the booming laughter from a well-told joke. These were the sounds that echoed in the heart of the Arctic home, dispelling the quiet dread and knitting together the fragile fabric of companionship. They were the unsung heroes of survival, providing not just amusement, but the emotional and social nourishment that kept spirits from freezing solid. As the lamp oil dwindles and the sounds of revelry slowly fade, you feel a lingering warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with the stove. It's the warmth of shared experience, of connection, of the unique brand of laughter forged in adversity. You might fall asleep with a song still humming in your head, or a particularly amusing anecdote playing on repeat. These moments of leisure, brief and hard-won as they were, truly transformed the stark reality of Arctic life, turning a potentially soul-crushing existence into something occasionally even joyful. The echoes of laughter and the lingering notes of a sea shanty might still hum in the close air of your cabin. But as the brief reprieve of leisure fades, the Arctic's relentless demands resurface. You've fed your spirit with stories and song. But now it's time to feed a more fundamental need, the human urge to create, to fix, to impose order on a world that constantly threatens to unravel. This is the realm of mending and making, where practical skills and quiet craftsmanship fill the endless idle hours with purpose, transforming worn-out gear and scraps of material into lifelines. In an environment as harsh and unforgiving as the 19th century Arctic, everything is under constant assault. Fabric freezes, wood splinters, metal corrodes. Nothing lasts, and replacement parts are thousands of miles away, beyond vast expanses of ice and ocean. This isn't a place where you simply discard something broken and buy a new one. Oh no. Here, every tear, every crack, every worn-out seam is a problem that must be solved. Your expedition isn't just a journey. It's a living, breathing testament to the art of improvisation and persistent repair. It's like living in a constant state of Fix-It Friday, except it's fix-it every single day. And the consequences of failure might involve losing a toe or a finger. The most common, and perhaps most vital, form of repair work is clothing mending. Your thick wool trousers, your heavy canvas coat, your precious fur mittens, these are your armor, your shield against the biting cold. A small tear left unaddressed can quickly become a gaping hole, compromising your warmth and risking frostbite. So, you'd spend hours hunched over a flickering lamp, needle and thread in hand, patching and darning. Imagine trying to mend a hole in a frozen, stiff piece of canvas with fingers that are perpetually numb. It's a slow, painstaking process, requiring patience that you didn't even know you possessed. A mainstream historical fact is that the crews were often expected to be largely self-sufficient in mending their own clothes, a crucial skill for prolonging the life of their essential gear. The sight of a dozen men, each with a needle and thread, quietly engaged in sartorial self-preservation, was a common domestic tableau. Socks, in particular, were a constant project. The sheer wear and tear on feet from endless tramping through snow and ice meant socks were perpetually developing holes. Darning socks, carefully weaving new yarn into the thin spots, became a meditative chore, a rhythmic motion that quieted the mind. You'd probably become an accidental expert in sock forensics, analyzing patterns of where to predict where the next hole would appear. Ah, yes, the classic big toe blowout, a winter classic. You might grimly observe to yourself, beyond clothing, virtually everything else required attention. Sledges would break their runners, requiring careful carpentry to patch and reinforce. Skis might crack, demanding ingenious repairs with leather thongs and resin. Tools, axes, shovels, even scientific instruments like compasses and sextants would be constantly sharpened, cleaned, and repaired. The ship itself was a behemoth of constant maintenance, patching minor leaks in the hull, splicing frayed ropes, or mending torn sails during brief thaws. Every man, regardless of his primary role, was expected to contribute to this collective effort of keeping the expedition, quite literally, afloat and moving. But the making aspect went beyond mere repair, with long stretches of forced idleness. Men would often turn to crafting for both utility and artistic expression. Carving was a popular pastime. From scraps of wood, bone, or even fossilized ivory if indigenous resources were available. Men would carve intricate figures, small animals, miniature ships, or abstract designs. These weren't just idle doodles. They were tangible expressions of creativity, small triumphs over the barren landscape. A particularly quirky tidbit is that some explorers would craft intricate walrus ivory chess sets, each piece a tiny, beautifully rendered sculpture, turning a simple game into an artistic masterpiece. These items, born of boredom and necessity, often became cherished souvenirs, carried home as proof of both endurance and unexpected talent. Ropework and knot tying were also elevated to an art form. Sailors would spend hours practicing complex knots, perfecting their dexterity, and creating intricate decorative pieces, sometimes even for sale or trade upon their return. The tactile satisfaction of a perfectly tied knot, The strength of a well-spliced rope provided a tangible sense of accomplishment. You'd often see men absently working on a knot while listening to a story or sitting by the stove, their hands busy even when their minds were elsewhere. It's like modern-day fidget spinners, but with a purpose, and far more impressive. For the more artistically inclined, drawing and sketching provided a creative outlet. Using whatever paper and pencils were available, men would capture the stark beauty of the Arctic landscape, the interior of the ship, or portraits of their shipmates. These quick sketches, often made in the dim light of a lamp, offered a personal record of their experience, a way to process the overwhelming grandeur and desolation of their surroundings. Some would even attempt to illuminate journals or letters, adding decorative flourishes and small illustrations, turning their personal writings into miniature works of art. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of craftsmanship and repair skills among 19th century expedition crews was a reflection of inherent Victorian values of self-reliance and industriousness, or simply a raw necessity driven by the extreme isolation and lack of resupply. Was it a cultural trait, or a purely practical adaptation to the limits of the environment? It's a compelling question, as these skills clearly contributed immensely to the survival and functioning of these isolated communities. The psychological benefits of these activities were immense. They provided a sense of purpose and accomplishment in a world that often stripped away both. The act of creation, of turning raw material or a broken object into something functional or beautiful, was a powerful antidote to the monotony and depression that could easily set in during the long winter. It kept minds sharp, hands busy, and contributed directly to the collective well-being of the expedition. There's something incredibly satisfying about looking at a patch you've sewn onto your own coat, knowing that your hands have contributed directly to your own survival. These quiet moments of focused labor, often performed in silence or two, the low murmur of conversation, were as much a part of Arctic domesticity as shared meals or games. They demonstrated the profound human need not just to consume, but to contribute. Not just to endure, but to create. As you finish a particularly tricky bit of mending, perhaps a new patch on a worn pair of trousers, you feel a small surge of quiet satisfaction. The world outside is still cold and vast, but within these walls, you've once again, with your own hands, exerted a measure of control, contributing to the delicate balance of survival. You've carefully mended a tear in your coat, carved a small, satisfying piece of driftwood, and felt that quiet surge of purpose that comes from creating something with your own hands. You've wrestled with the physical discomforts of the Arctic and found ingenuity in domestic tasks. But there's another, often unspoken, element that truly softens the edges of this harsh existence: the unexpected and profoundly comforting presence of animal companionship. Because when the world outside is cold, vast, and indifferent, a wagging tail or a soft purr can offer a warmth that no stove can provide. For many Arctic expeditions, dogs were not just pets. They were an indispensable, four-legged extension of the crew. These weren't your pampered lapdogs, though their capacity for affection was just as boundless. These were powerful, resilient creatures, often Inuit dogs or huskies, bred for the unforgiving polar environment. You'd spend countless hours tending to them, feeding them precious rations, untangling their harnesses, checking their paws for frostbite, and mending their sledging gear. A mainstream historical fact is that sled dogs were absolutely vital for transport and hauling supplies across the frozen landscapes. pushing the boundaries of what was humanly possible in such extreme conditions. Without them, many of the grandest expeditions simply would not have proceeded. They were the original all-terrain vehicles, just with more fur and a tendency to bark at the occasional polar bear. But beyond their practical utility, these dogs were undeniably companions. After a grueling day on the ice, slogging through drifts, or wrestling with jammed sledges, returning to the ship or hut meant being greeted by a flurry of excited barks, wagging tails, and wet noses. You'd find yourself kneeling, scratching behind ears, running your gloved hand over their thick, damp fur. Their unconditional affection, their unbridled enthusiasm for a simple walk, or rather, a run across miles of ice, was a constant source of joy and distraction from the gnawing monotony. They were often allowed into the living quarters, finding warm spots by the stove or curled up near a bunk, their presence a palpable comfort. You might even find yourself sharing a precious morsel of your own limited rations with a particularly persistent pair of canine eyes, knowing it was probably worth the sacrifice for the unspoken bond it strengthened. It wasn't just the working dogs, though. On some ships, a cat might have stowed away or been deliberately brought along, often for mouse control, but quickly becoming an unofficial mascot. Imagine a scruffy ship's cat with a perpetually unamused expression, stalking imaginary mice. In the flickering lamplight, or curling up on a pile of warm blankets, offering a soft purr that resonated through the ship's timbers. Their quiet presence, their independent nature, yet their willingness to seek out human warmth, provided a different kind of solace. You might find yourself absent-mindedly stroking its fur, the gentle vibration a soothing counterpoint to the constant creaking of the ice. It's like having a tiny, furry, purring therapist who occasionally sheds on your last clean shirt. And then there were the more unconventional companions, Arctic explorers, with their boundless curiosity and sometimes questionable judgment, occasionally attempted to adopt local wildlife. A stray polar bear cub, orphaned or simply curious, might be brought aboard. Imagine the chaos. Feeding a growing apex predator on a ship already struggling with provisions, attempting to house it safely, and dealing with its inevitable, playful, and potentially destructive antics. These ventures were often short-lived for obvious reasons, but the sheer audacity and the momentary novelty offered a memorable distraction. A quirky tidbit. One famous expedition reportedly kept a fox cub as a pet, delighting the crew with its playful antics, before it eventually escaped or was released. It probably thought, right, time to get back to a life where my meals aren't hardtack. The presence of animals, whether loyal sled dogs or a grumpy ship's cat, served a crucial psychological function. They were living, breathing connections to the natural world, a reminder that life thrived even in this desolate expanse. They offered unconditional affection and a simple, honest joy that cut through the intellectual and emotional complexities of human interaction. They also provided a sense of responsibility and purpose beyond the immediate goals of the expedition. Caring for another living being, especially one so dependent on you, could be a powerful anchor against despair. The challenges of keeping animals were significant. Feeding them meant dedicating valuable rations, often at the expense of human provisions. Keeping them warm and healthy in the extreme cold required constant vigilance. Disease, injury, or conflicts between animals or with disgruntled crew members were ever-present concerns. And the emotional toll of losing an animal, whether to illness, accident, or the difficult decision to cull them due to dwindling resources, could be devastating. Historians still argue whether the deep emotional attachment explorers formed with their animals, particularly sled dogs, sometimes led to decisions that were ethically questionable in terms of animal welfare or even detrimental to the expeditions. Primary goals. Was the bond too strong to allow for purely rational choices when resources dwindled? It's a debate that highlights the complex human-animal dynamic in extreme survival situations. Despite these difficulties, the bond was often profound. You'd watch a dog, its breath pluming in the icy air, straining tirelessly in harness, and feel a deep respect, a shared sense of purpose. You'd see a cat rubbing against a shipmate's leg, and be reminded of the simple, universal need for comfort and companionship. These animals, seemingly so out of place in such a harsh environment, were in fact perfectly attuned to its rhythms, and their presence somehow made the Arctic feel a little less lonely, a little more alive as the day turns to the long Arctic night. You might find yourself sitting quietly, stroking the soft fur of a dog curled at your feet, or listening to the rhythmic purr of a cat nestled on your lap. The simple, non-judgmental presence of these creatures offered a profound sense of peace. They didn't care about the expedition's progress, the scientific discoveries, or the political squabbles back home. They only cared about warmth, food, and the touch of a human hand. In a world stripped bare of most comforts, that affection was a treasure beyond measure, a quiet hearth in the vast, frozen wilderness. The purr of a ship's cat, the comforting nudge of a loyal dog. These simple animal comforts provide a crucial warmth, a tether to the familiar in a world utterly alien. But beyond the emotional solace, there's another anchor, a different kind of purpose that transcends mere survival, the relentless pursuit of knowledge. For many 19th century Arctic expeditions, scientific observation and data collection weren't just secondary objectives. They were the very raison d'etre, providing an intellectual ballast against the crushing weight of isolation and the endless, uniform expanse of white. You find yourself hunched over a desk, or perhaps a makeshift table in the cramped cabin, a flickering oil lamp casting dancing shadows across your face. Your fingers, still slightly stiff despite the layers of wool, delicately manipulate a pen, meticulously recording numbers onto a frost-crisped page. This is the ritual of the daily observation, a constant, unwavering commitment to the empirical, every hour or every few hours, regardless of the weather. Someone often you must venture out, or at least to a designated instrument station to take readings. It's like being part of the most exclusive and frankly coldest data entry team in history. The sheer variety of data they collected is staggering. You'd record the temperature, a grim tally of the mercury's plummet. You'd note the barometric pressure, hoping for subtle shifts that might signal a change in the weather, even if change often just meant slightly more intense blizzard. Wind speed and direction were meticulously logged, along with cloud cover. A particularly poignant detail during the polar night, when clouds only served to obscure the stars. A mainstream historical fact is that these meteorological observations were painstakingly kept daily, sometimes hourly, forming a crucial record of the Arctic climate that still informs scientific understanding today. It was a tedious, repetitive task, but each number was a brick in the growing edifice of human knowledge. Then there were the magnetic observations, a prime scientific objective for many expeditions. The Earth's magnetic poles were a source of immense fascination and practical importance for navigation. You'd spend hours in a specially constructed magnetic observatory, often a small, non-ferrous hut built on the ice near the ship, shivering as you carefully aligned a delicate magnetometer. The instrument, a finicky contraption of magnets and mirrors, had to be protected from your own body heat and any metallic interference. Imagine trying to get accurate readings while your breath freezes on the glass and your fingers are numb. It's a job for the truly dedicated, or perhaps the slightly masochistic. Just need to hold perfectly still. While my nose freezes solid, you might mutter, as the wind rattles the flimsy walls of the hut. Astronomical observations were equally vital. Using a sextant or a chronometer, you'd fix your position using the stars or the sun when it deigned to appear. This wasn't just for navigation. It was also for precisely charting longitude and latitude, a critical aspect of mapping the unexplored regions. During the long polar night, the aurora borealis often became a subject of intense scientific scrutiny, its shifting colors and forms meticulously recorded, even as its sheer ethereal beauty offered a transcendent distraction. It's hard to focus on the scientific nuances of atmospheric ionization when the sky is literally putting on the most spectacular light show you've ever seen. The ice itself was a constant subject of study. You'd measure its thickness, observe its movement, classify its types, everything from pancake ice to massive, ancient flows. These observations were critical for understanding the mechanics of Arctic seas and for predicting safe routes, or recognizing dangerous ones. You might spend hours chipping away at a massive ice wall to get a cross-section, or carefully noting the pressure ridges forming against the ship's hull. The low groans and creaks of the ice, a constant, unsettling soundtrack to your work. And, of course, there was natural history. Every new plant, every bird spotted, every mammal encountered was meticulously documented. You'd sketch the outline of a polar bear from a distance, or carefully press a tiny, hardy flower found clinging to a rock. Geological samples were chipped from outcrops, their composition noted. These observations, often recorded in richly detailed journals alongside the numerical data, paint a vivid picture of the Arctic ecosystem as it was in the 19th century. A quirky tidbit is that some explorers would even attempt to collect and preserve Arctic insects, a challenging task given the freezing temperatures and the fragile nature of their specimens. Imagine trying to pin a tiny beetle when your breath is misting up your vision. The instruments themselves were marvels of 19th century engineering, yet incredibly fragile in this unforgiving environment. Glass lenses would fog or crack, metal parts would seize up from the cold, chronometers could lose their precision due to temperature fluctuations. Maintaining and calibrating these delicate tools in sub-zero conditions was a constant struggle. Ink would freeze in your pen, requiring constant warming. Paper would become brittle, cracking with every fold. The sheer meticulousness required to perform accurate science in such conditions was astounding. Historians still argue whether the scientific output of many 19th century Arctic expeditions, while valuable, sometimes took a back seat to the primary objectives of national prestige. Geographical discovery, or even simply survival. Was the science truly at the forefront? Or was it a convenient justification for expeditions that were largely driven by ambition and geopolitical competition? It's a fascinating debate as you look at the mountain of data collected versus the public narratives of daring heroism. The psychological benefits of this scientific rigor were profound. It provided structure and routine in an otherwise formless existence. It offered intellectual engagement, a compelling distraction from the physical discomforts and the grinding monotony. Each successful observation, Each new piece of data collected contributed to a sense of purpose and accomplishment. You weren't just surviving, you were actively contributing to the sum of human knowledge, pushing the boundaries of understanding about one of the Earth's most mysterious regions. As the lamp flickers and you meticulously add the last data point to your log, a sense of quiet satisfaction settles over you. The numbers on the page might seem dry and inanimate, but you know the immense effort, the cold fingers, the hours of patient observation that went into each one. This daily ritual, this commitment to precision and inquiry, is a powerful antidote to the wildness of the Arctic. It provides a constant intellectual anchor, a reminder that even in the most isolated corner of the world, the human mind remains relentlessly curious, seeking to understand, to categorize, and to make sense of. The Uncharted. You've meticulously logged the latest magnetic deviation, carefully noted the ice conditions, and perhaps even sketched a rare Arctic bird. The pursuit of knowledge, of understanding this formidable landscape, provides a powerful intellectual anchor. But even as your mind soars with scientific inquiry, your body, that fragile vessel, remains stubbornly grounded in a stark reality: the constant, magnified threat of medical misadventures. Because in the 19th century Arctic, a common cold isn't just an inconvenience, it's a potential death sentence, and a minor cut can quickly escalate into a life-threatening crisis. Imagine this: a small cough, perhaps just a tickle in your throat from the dry, cold air. Back home, you'd shrug it off, maybe take a spoonful of cough syrup. Here, it's a red flag. That cough, left unchecked in the damp, confined space, can quickly descend into bronchitis, then into full-blown pneumonia, a relentless foe that picks off the weakened, with no fresh air, no proper ventilation, and a medical kit that looks more like a curiosity cabinet than a modern pharmacy. Every common ailment takes on a terrifying, magnified importance. It's like playing a video game where every minor scratch has a 50% chance of instantly becoming a fatal infection. Talk about high stakes. The ultimate scourge of these long voyages, a mainstream historical fact you simply can't escape, was scurvy. Before the full understanding of vitamin C's role, its effects were a terrifying mystery. You'd see your gums begin to swell, then bleed. Old wounds would reopen. Your skin might erupt in dark, bruised spots, and your joints would ache, becoming stiff and agonizingly painful. Eventually, without fresh food, lethargy would set in, followed by a slow, agonizing decline. Explorers tried everything to combat it: pickled vegetables, spruce beer, vinegar, and even specific types of preserved meats. They knew something helped, but the precise mechanism was elusive, leading to desperate, often ineffective, measures. The mere whisper of scurvy could cast a palpable pall of dread over the entire expedition. Beyond scurvy, the omnipresent enemy was the cold itself. Frostbite was a daily hazard. You'd feel a tingling, then a numbness in your fingers, toes, nose, or ears. If left too long, the affected tissue would turn waxy white, then blue-black as the cells died, freezing solid like little pieces of meat. The only treatment was often slow warming, which was excruciatingly painful, or, in severe cases, amputation. Imagine watching a shipmate, or even yourself, undergo a limb removal with only rudimentary anesthesia and a handsaw. It's enough to make you instinctively wiggle your toes inside your boots, just to feel them. Hypothermia was the stealthy killer, creeping up on you, making you confused, clumsy, and lethargic before your body simply shut down. The sheer cold could drain the life out of you faster than any exotic disease. Injuries were also common. The ship's decks were treacherous, often slick with ice or snow. A fall could mean a broken bone, a dislocated joint, axe wounds from chopping ice or wood, knife cuts from preparing food. Even dog bites from the restless sled teams were daily occurrences. In an environment where sterility was impossible, even a small cut could turn into a raging infection, leading to gangrene and once again, the dire prospect of amputation or death. You became acutely aware of every bump, every scrape, knowing that medical help was incredibly basic. The expedition's surgeon or doctor, often a man with limited training by modern standards, was a crucial, yet incredibly overburdened, figure. His medical chest, a large wooden box filled with a motley collection of vials, powders, and crude instruments, was his arsenal. Opium for pain, calomel, a mercury compound for various digestive issues, quinine for fevers, perhaps some rudimentary antiseptics like carbolic acid. He was often working in dim light, with little assistance, trying to diagnose and treat complex conditions with knowledge that was, by today's standards, tragically incomplete. Historians still argue whether the medical understanding and practices of the 19th century, while advanced for their time, were fundamentally inadequate for the unique challenges of polar exploration, leading to a higher death toll than necessary. Was it a lack of knowledge, or a lack of truly effective treatments, that doomed so many? For dental problems, you were largely on your own. A toothache, already miserable, could become unbearable when exacerbated by scurvy. The doctor might have basic forceps for extractions, but filling cavities or complex procedures were out of the question. You'd likely just suffer, perhaps hoping the tooth would eventually fall out. Just pull it out, doc. And if I scream, it's just the cold wind, nothing to worry about. You might quip, trying to inject some levity into the grim reality. And then there were the mental health challenges. The unrelenting darkness, the extreme isolation, the constant danger, the monotonous diet, and the lack of privacy could all contribute to severe depression, anxiety, and even a form of psychosis, sometimes referred to as Arctic madness. Arguments would flare up over trivial matters, resentment would simmer, and some men would simply withdraw, losing their will to live. While not a physical ailment in the same way as frostbite, these mental struggles were just as debilitating, silently eroding the strength of the crew, a quirky tidbit that illustrates the era's medical beliefs. Some doctors on expeditions firmly believed in the practice of bleeding patients, even for seemingly unrelated ailments like fever or inflammation. They'd use lancets to cut veins or apply leeches, believing it would balance the humors or remove bad blood. Given the already weakened state of many explorers due to poor nutrition, this often did more harm than good, further depleting their strength and vital fluids. It was a charming blend of traditional medicine and sheer desperation. Despite the primitive conditions and limited knowledge, there was immense resilience. Shipmates would nurse each other, offering comfort, applying crude bandages, and bringing what little warm liquid they could. The shared vulnerability created a fierce, unspoken bond. You'd see a man enduring agonizing pain with stoicism, knowing that complaining served no purpose. This acceptance of suffering, this grim determination to simply keep going, was as much a part of their medical care as any potion from the doctor's bag. As the lamp casts its dim glow over the small, sick berth, you're reminded that every breath, every heartbeat, is a testament to survival against overwhelming odds. The intellectual challenge of science might stimulate the mind, but the physical reality of illness and injury keeps you grounded in a harsh, unforgiving present. You learn to appreciate the absence of pain, the simple act of standing upright, the blessing of a cough-free night. Because in the Arctic, good health isn't a given. It's a hard one, often fleeting, domestic triumph. You've battled the insidious threats of scurvy and frostbite, understanding that in this unforgiving domain, your body is a fragile, intensely vulnerable machine. But as the long, dark days of winter give way to the even longer, darker nights, another aspect of Arctic domesticity comes into profound focus: the celestial watch. Because when the sun deserts you for months on end, the mesmerizing Arctic night sky isn't just a backdrop. It becomes both your most vital navigational aid and the greatest canvas for profound contemplation. Imagine stepping out from the relative dimness of the cabin onto the deck of your icebound vessel. The initial shock of the extreme cold is palpable, a sharp, bracing slap against your exposed skin. Your breath instantly crystallizes, forming a cloud that dances away into the crisp, clean air. But then, as your eyes adjust, you look up, and what you see, truly, is breathtaking. The sky isn't just dark, it's a vast, inky black velvet, studded with a million diamonds. Stars, countless and impossibly bright, blaze with an intensity you've never witnessed before, unmarred by city lights or atmospheric pollution. It's so clear, you feel as though you could reach out and pluck them from the velvet. It's like turning off every light in the universe except the stars. A truly humbling spectacle for the expedition. These stars were far more than pretty lights. They were your clock, your compass, and your roadmap in a featureless white world. Celestial navigation was a mainstream historical fact, the primary method for determining position before the advent of modern GPS. With a sextant in your gloved hands, you'd align its mirrors to capture the precise angle of a star or the moon above the horizon. Then, consulting your meticulously kept chronometers, those precious, accurate timepieces, themselves a marvel of engineering in this cold. You'd perform complex calculations to fix your latitude and longitude. This was painstaking work, often done with numb fingers, squinting into the cold through the instrument's tiny scope. The mere act of obtaining a clear reading, especially with the ship rocking slightly even in frozen ice, felt like a small triumph of human ingenuity over elemental defiance. The moon, when it appeared, was a benevolent goddess in this domain. Its pale light would transform the landscape, casting long, ethereal shadows across the snow and ice, turning the world into a silvery, dreamlike expanse. It wasn't warm light, certainly, but it allowed you to see, to move, to perform duties, without relying solely on the precious, limited glow of lanterns. You could almost feel the tides, those unseen forces, being tugged by its distant influence. But beyond the practicalities of navigation, the Arctic night sky offered something far more profound. The aurora borealis, the northern lights. You'd stand on deck, shivering, but utterly transfixed as shimmering curtains of green, pink, and purple light would begin to dance across the heavens. They would pulse, undulate, and swirl, sometimes exploding in silent crescendos of light that defied explanation. It was a spectacle of raw, untamed beauty, making you feel infinitesimally small against the backdrop of the cosmos, yet intensely alive. A quirky tidbit: some explorers described the aurora as having a faint, crackling sound, like static electricity, though this was likely a trick of the mind in the profound silence of the Arctic night. It was certainly enough to make the hairs on your arms stand up, even if it was just the cold. Witnessing the aurora was a spiritual experience, a direct confrontation with the sublime. It transcended the daily grind of survival, the cold, the hunger, the constant threat of illness. It was a reminder that even in this desolate, barren place, the universe still held moments of staggering beauty, moments that spoke of forces far greater than any human endeavor. You'd find yourself simply gazing, mouth agape, forgetting the biting wind and the numbness in your toes, lost in the silent, cosmic ballet unfolding above you. The watch system meant long, solitary hours on deck, often in pitch darkness, save for the stars, and, if you were lucky, the aurora. It was during these quiet vigils that contemplation truly set in. You'd stand there, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, listening to the creaking of the ice against the hull, the sigh of the wind across the frozen wastes. Your thoughts would drift, unfettered by the usual distractions of civilization. You'd ponder the vastness of space, the insignificance of your own journey, the sheer audacity of your presence in this frozen wilderness. The stars, so brilliant and numerous, became symbols of endless distance, of worlds beyond your wildest imaginings. This profound solitude, while sometimes crushing, also offered a unique opportunity for introspection. You'd think about home, about your family, about the choices that led you to this icy frontier. The clarity of the Arctic air seemed to extend to your thoughts, cutting through superficialities and revealing core truths. Sometimes, this led to moments of deep melancholy, the isolation echoing the loneliness within. Other times, it brought a surprising sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of your place in the universe. Historians still argue whether the prolonged exposure to the unique light conditions of the Arctic, the endless twilight, the month-long night, the dazzling aurora, had a significant long-term psychological impact on explorers, potentially contributing to altered perceptions or mental health challenges upon their return. Was it simply a magnificent display, or did it subtly reshape their understanding of reality? It's a fascinating, if unanswerable, question that speaks to the profound influence of environment on the human psyche. The cold was your constant companion during these watches. Your breath would frost your beard and eyelashes, turning you into a temporary ice sculpture. The metal of the sextant would burn your fingers, demanding the use of thick gloves, which in turn made precise adjustments excruciatingly difficult. You'd learn to be quick, efficient, snatching your readings between gusts of wind, before the instruments themselves became too cold to handle. It was a testament to human resilience and sheer stubbornness that such precise scientific work could be conducted in such punishing conditions. Just another day of extreme stargazing. Nothing to see here, you might wryly tell yourself, as your nose threatened to fall off, as your watch finally draws to a close and a shipmate arrives. To relieve you, you take one last lingering look at the celestial spectacle. The stars still blaze, the aurora might still shimmer, and the profound silence of the Arctic still holds its sway. You carry that image with you, back into the dim, cramped cabin, knowing that you've witnessed something truly extraordinary, something that transcends the daily grind of survival. It's a powerful reminder that even in the heart of frozen desolation, there is immense beauty and a quiet, profound connection to the larger cosmos that makes every shivering moment worthwhile. You've gazed into the endless, star-strewn canvas of the Arctic night, finding both navigational certainty and profound wonder in its silent grandeur. The universe feels vast, and your place within it feels both insignificant and deeply connected. But even as the celestial ballet plays out above, a subtle shift begins to stir the frozen world around you, a slow, almost imperceptible awakening. The long, deep night of winter, with its relentless grip, begins to yield, and with it comes a powerful, almost intoxicating surge of hope, the quiet, yet insistent, promise of spring. This isn't a sudden, dramatic awakening like the burst of spring in warmer climes. Oh no. The Arctic spring is a long, drawn-out affair, a slow shedding of winter's heavy cloak. Initially, it's just a faint hint of lengthening daylight, a few more minutes of twilight bleeding into the edges of the perpetual night. Each day, that sliver of light expands, stretching further, painting the sky with pale pinks and soft blues where before there was only inky black. You notice it first almost subconsciously, then with a growing, thrilling certainty. Your body, so accustomed to the darkness, responds with a subtle surge of energy, a stirring from its long, dormant state. It's like waking up after a ridiculously long nap, still a bit groggy, but with a definite sense of purpose. Then come the sounds. The ice, which has groaned and creaked in a constant low thrum all winter, begins to produce new, more ominous, yet equally hopeful noises. Deep, resonant cracks echo through the ship, startling at first, then becoming a symphony of impending change. The ice floes might shift, grinding against each other with a sound like thunder, creating open leads of dark water that promise eventual freedom. You might hear the trickle of meltwater, a tiny, persistent sound that signifies the beginning of the great thaw. And if you're lucky, you might spot the return of migratory birds, a lone guillemot or a hardy little auk, a living, fluttering testament to the world beyond your icy prison. This subtle, yet profound, transition injects a desperate, almost manic, surge of hope and renewed morale into the expedition. The psychological burden of the endless darkness, the confinement, the monotony begins to lift. Men who were stoic and withdrawn during the deepest winter suddenly find a renewed spring in their step, a sharper glint in their eyes. Conversations become more animated, plans are discussed with greater fervor, and even the cook might find a new spring in his step, perhaps contemplating how to use the first potential fresh game. It's an infectious optimism, a belief that the long, dark ordeal is finally drawing to a close. This renewed energy translates directly into diligent preparations for the active season. The ship itself, frozen solid in its icy berth for months, needs to be freed and prepared. You'd be part of the arduous task of cutting away the ice from the hull, using picks and saws, slowly liberating the vessel from its winter embrace. The sound of tools scraping against ice, the splash of water, the shouts of men coordinating their efforts. It's a flurry of purposeful activity. You'd carefully inspect the hull for damage, patch any minor leaks, and ensure the rigging and sails are in top condition for when the ship can finally move under its own power, over land. Equipment also receives meticulous attention. Sledges are repaired and reinforced, their runners polished for optimal glide. Skis are checked for cracks and made ready for long journeys across the thawing landscape. Tents, used for overland forays, are meticulously inspected for tears, patched, and reproofed against the eventual melt. Every piece of gear, from an ice axe to a cooking pot, is cleaned, sharpened, and prepared for heavy use. A mainstream historical fact is that the spring thaw marked the crucial period for renewed exploration, demanding that all equipment be in peak condition for sledge journeys or attempts to reach specific geographical objectives. It was like a giant, very cold pre-season equipment check for the world's most extreme sports team. Provision checks become paramount. What food supplies remain? How much fuel is left? You'd meticulously inventory everything, assessing what needs to be conserved, what can be used for a celebratory meal, and what might be left for the return journey. The freshwater situation is still critical, but now, with melting snow and ice, there's at least the potential for easier access. The medical officer would also conduct more thorough health assessments, specifically looking for any lingering effects of scurvy, and perhaps increasing the intake of anti-scurvy remedies like lime juice, knowing that renewed activity would demand renewed vigor. The most personal preparation often involved clothing. All those layers that got damp and stiff during the winter now need to be thoroughly aired, patched, and cleaned as best as possible. You'd inspect your fur-lined boots, your thick wool trousers, your invaluable mittens, searching for any weak points that could lead to discomfort or, worse, frostbite. When you're once again exposed to the elements for extended periods, it's a practical form of spring cleaning, just without the sunshine and the fresh scent of laundry detergent. Right, let's see how many more patches this old jacket can take. You might muse, eyeing a particularly worn elbow beyond the practical. There's the intense intellectual work of planning for renewed exploration or the eventual return journey. Maps are unfurled, routes are debated, and contingencies are discussed with renewed vigor. The captain and officers spend hours poring over charts, discussing ice conditions, and weighing the risks and rewards of potential paths. The very act of planning, of charting a future course, is a powerful psychological boost, turning abstract hope into concrete action, a quirky tidbit that illustrates the depth of their anticipation. Some expeditions would hold impromptu spring, forecast betting pools, where men would wager small items, a ration of sugar, a bit of tobacco, on the exact date the ship would finally break free of the ice, or when the first open water would be sighted from a specific point. It was a light-hearted way to channel their collective longing and marked the shift from passive endurance to active anticipation. The stakes weren't high, but the bragging rights could last for weeks. Historians still argue whether the physiological and psychological benefits of the returning light and increased outdoor activity in spring were sufficient to fully reverse the health declines and mental fatigue accumulated during the long Arctic winter. Was it a complete reset, or did the long-term effects of extreme cold and isolation linger, even as the sun returned? It's a complex question, highlighting the profound impact of the polar environment on human well-being. As the sun climbs higher each day, even if it's only a few degrees above the horizon, the spirit on board becomes palpably lighter. The constant creaking of the ship, once a monotonous lament, now feels like a stirring, a slow stretch towards liberation. You find yourself spending more time on deck, breathing in the increasingly fresh, though still icy air, feeling the pale sun on your face like a long-lost friend. The preparations for spring are not just chores. They are rituals of renewal, acts of faith in the coming warmth, and a defiant embrace of life after months of confronting nothingness. The Arctic isn't just a place of survival. It's a place where hope, sometimes, truly thaws. The subtle lengthening of days, the shifting creaks of the ice, the hopeful buzz of renewed activity, these were the harbingers of spring. A promise whispered across the frozen expanse. You've diligently prepared your gear, recalibrated your instruments, and felt the stirrings of hope in your chest. But now, as the Arctic truly begins to thaw, that hope transforms into a powerful, almost overwhelming longing. Because as the ice finally, dramatically, begins to break its grip, your thoughts turn not just to the next stage of the expedition, but profoundly, almost achingly, to homeward-bound dreams. One morning, you feel it, a distinct, undeniable tremor. Through the ship's hull, not the familiar groaning of ice under pressure, but a deeper, more resonant sound. You rush on deck, your breath pluming in the still cold air, and there it is. A thin line of dark, open water, snaking through the seemingly endless white. Then another, and another. The ice, which has held you captive for months, begins to crack with a sound like distant thunder, splitting into vast, shifting flows. This is the great breakup, a chaotic, terrifying, yet utterly exhilarating spectacle. The ship, once a static fixture, slowly begins to gain a subtle, almost imperceptible momentum, rocking gently, then more discernible in the newly formed leads. It's like a giant sigh of relief from the entire Arctic, and from every single soul aboard. The change in the soundscape is profound. The constant, muffled quiet of winter, broken only by the wind or the ship's internal creaks, gives way to a symphony of liberation. You hear the lapping of water against the hull, the crunch and grind of ice floes colliding, the mournful cries of gulls returning to the newly accessible waters. The very air seems to vibrate with possibility. You're no longer just existing. You're moving, however slowly, however tentatively, through a dynamic, awakening world. A mainstream historical fact is that navigating the breaking pack ice was often as dangerous, if not more so, than enduring the winter freeze, requiring extreme vigilance and skilled seamanship to avoid being crushed by shifting flows. It was a beautiful, terrifying dance, a high-stakes game of cosmic Jenga. As the ship begins to find its way through the intricate labyrinth of leads and flows, inch by arduous inch, the conversations in the mess hall shift. They are no longer solely about the present dangers or the scientific observations. They are about home. Every man carries a mental picture of what awaits him, a vibrant, detailed tableau painted with the colors of longing. You close your eyes, and you can almost taste it. Not pemmican and hardtack, but a perfectly roasted joint of beef, fresh vegetables, a crisp apple. You can almost feel it. Not the constant chill and damp wool, but the luxurious warmth of a hot bath, the softness of clean linen sheets, the plush carpet beneath bare feet. Imagine the sheer bliss of not having to wear 6 layers just to exist indoors. It's enough to make you actually shiver, but this time with anticipation. Privacy is another common dream. The idea of having a room of your own, a space where you can close a door, where your every sound isn't heard and your every movement isn't observed, becomes an intoxicating fantasy. You picture quiet evenings by a real fireplace, not a smoky stove, reading a book without the constant shuffle of shipmates. The very concept of personal space, a forgotten luxury, fills your mind with a profound sense of yearning. Oh, to have a toilet that doesn't freeze. You might hear someone declare, with a heartfelt sigh that speaks volumes about the truly unglamorous aspects of their journey. The social dreams are just as vivid. Not just seeing your family, but experiencing the bustling, vibrant world of familiar faces, the easy chatter of a crowded pub, the laughter of children, the gentle murmur of a market. You picture your own loved ones, a mother's embrace, a wife's soft hand, the excited shouts of children, the longing for genuine, unforced conversation, for debates about trivial matters, for the simple joy of anonymous presence in a crowd becomes almost unbearable. After months, sometimes years, of the same handful of faces, the thought of new people, new voices, new perspectives is a powerful draw. The very landscape of home becomes a vivid dream. Green fields, towering trees swaying in a gentle breeze, the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, the sight of a river flowing freely, not frozen solid, the familiar architecture of a bustling town, the comfort of well-worn streets. You've adapted to the stark, monochrome beauty of the Arctic, but your soul yearns for the vibrant tapestry of the temperate world. A quirky tidbit: some explorers reported dreaming vividly and almost constantly of fresh fruit during the long winter, a testament to the body's profound craving for vitamin C and the mind's relentless pursuit of familiar comforts. Imagine dreaming of a perfectly ripe orange when you've only seen dried peas for months. As the days turn into weeks, and the ship steadily, or at least less perilously, makes its way south, the dreams become more insistent, more detailed. You start to plan. What will you eat first? Who will you see? What stories will you tell? You imagine the awkwardness of re-entry, the questions from those who can't possibly understand what you've endured. You might even find yourself anticipating the strange sensation of a floor that doesn't constantly creak, or air that doesn't bite at your exposed skin. I'll probably try to chop ice off my butter at breakfast for weeks. Someone might joke, realizing how deeply ingrained these Arctic habits have become. Historians still argue whether the romanticized narratives of heroic return that often greeted explorers upon their arrival home truly captured the immense difficulties of readjusting to normal life, including potential long-term psychological impacts from isolation, trauma, and the fundamental shift in perspective. Was the celebrated return a genuine reintegration, or a polite performance for a public eager for triumphs? It's a poignant debate, highlighting the invisible struggles that continued long after the physical journey ended. The journey back is not without its perils. Late-season storms, lingering icebergs, the sheer psychological fatigue of nearing the end after so much effort. But each nautical mile covered, each degree of latitude gained, brings a renewed burst of energy. You see the horizon soften, the colors of the sea deepen, and eventually, the first faint outlines of land that aren't snow-covered peaks. These are the markers of your return, the tangible proof that the long, uncharted domesticity of the Arctic is finally fading into memory. The lessons learned, the bonds forged, the quiet resilience cultivated in the face of unimaginable hardship. These are the true souvenirs you carry, more precious than any scientific discovery. The ship, once a frozen sentinel in a world of white, now cuts through the open water, pushing steadily towards the horizon. The stark, magnificent beauty of the Arctic begins to recede, replaced by the soft, familiar hues of a milder world. The relentless creaking of ice gives way to the rhythmic splash of waves, a gentle lullaby that promises solace. You stand on deck, feeling the faint warmth of a sun that seems higher, stronger, less like a distant lamp. The smells in the air are different now, carrying hints of salt and distant greenery, a subtle invitation to a life you almost forgot. The sounds of birds grow louder, their calls a cheerful, comforting chorus that beckons you onward. As the shores grow nearer, thoughts of domestic comfort become less a dream and more a tangible reality, a whispered promise carried on the breeze. Imagine the simple luxury of a clean, unblemished sheet, the feel of soft, dry clothes, the sheer quietness of a room not filled with the constant drone of the ship and the groaning ice. It's the memory of fresh bread, warm from the oven, a proper bath that truly cleanses, and the uncomplicated joy of a conversation with a loved one, free from the shadow of immediate survival. The vastness of the Arctic has shrunk your world, but it has also expanded your appreciation for the simplest, most fundamental comforts. Your senses, honed by months of scarcity, will now savor every nuance of abundance. Let the gentle sway of the ship lull you. Let the sounds of the ocean cradle you. The journey, with its harsh realities and its quiet triumphs, has left its indelible mark, but it has also prepared you for a deeper, richer appreciation of the familiar. The long night is over, the ice has melted, and the world is waiting to embrace you with its warmth. Drift now, with the gentle current, towards the shores of comfort and sweet repose.